Today's daf is Kuf Mem 140. We're starting on page 139. Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet. At the very bottom of the page, the last line, V'notnim betza b'misanenet. One can put an egg into a strainer. Now what this is speaking about is that they used to strain the mustard, and the mustard would collect at the bottom of the strainer, or the bottom of the sieve, and then they would put an egg in the strainer, and what would happen was that the yolk of the egg would go in and mix with the mustard, while the white part of the egg would stay above with the dregs from the mustard. So we learned Tanet Yaakov Korcha. Yaakov Korcha said, what is the reason why one is allowed to use the strainer or the sieve in this way? It should be prohibited because of borer, because you're separating one part from the other. The answer is, since the reason for separating the yellow is simply in order to color the mustard, therefore it's not a matter of ochel and pesolet, it's not a matter of something you want to eat and something that's considered refuse or pesolet, but it's simply that you are coloring the mustard with the yellow part, and therefore it does not come under the heading of borer. We go on. Itmar, it was stated, Chardal shelashum erev Shabbat lemachar amarav lemacho b'keli avalo bayad. If somebody needed mustard, and what they would do was they would put it together with water or some other liquid and make it into a sort of a doughy kind of substance by mixing the mustard seeds with some kind of liquid. So Rab says, if you did that on erev Shabbat, then on Shabbat itself you can continue to mash it up or to mix it with your hand, with a vessel, but not with your hands. Reason apparently being that using the hand was more effective for blending the seeds with the liquid. Amar le Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Biyad atukol yoma mimachole bayad machal chamorimhu." Shmuel says, "Is that the normal way to knead mustard with your hand? Is it the food of a donkey?" In other words, what he's saying is that this is not the normal way of doing it. So it might be that using your hand is more effective, but the reality is it's not the normal way of doing it, and therefore it should be less of a concern. Really, it should be that you can mix it with your hands, but not with a vessel, because even though using your hands is more effective, it's not the way you would normally do it. Itmar, it was stated, Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Elazar amar echadze v'echadze asur, either way of mixing it is prohibited. You have to leave it the way you made it on Erev Shabbat. For Rabbi Yochanan amar echadze v'echadze mutar. Rabbi Yochanan says either way is permitted, whether you use your hand or you mix it with a vessel. Abaye v'Ravad amri tarvayu en halachak Rabbi Yochanan, and Abaye and Rava both say the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yochanan. Apparently, they are supporting the view of Rabbi Elazar, saying that it is not permitted to knead this mustard mixture in any way. Kam Rabbi Yochanan b'shitatei Rabbi Elazar, kam Rabbi Elazar b'shitatei Shmuel. Eventually, two of the Rabbanim here changed positions. Rabbi Yochanan switched over to Rabbi Elazar's view that rather than permitting everything, prohibits both kneading with the hand and with a spoon or another vessel. And Rabbi Elazar switched from forbidding everything to agreeing with Shmuel that with a vessel is prohibited, but with the hand is permitted. And then we have, in light of this revision of views, Abaye v'Rava damrei tarvayu halacha ki Rabbi Yochanan. This time Abaye and Rava are supporting Rabbi Yochanan, because just as they supported the position of Rabbi Elazar before that prohibited any kind of kneading of mustard on Shabbat, now that Rabbi Yochanan has switched to adopt that view, they're supporting him. Imeda Abaye avdale velo achal. The mother of Abaye, and incidentally, whenever it says the mother of Abaye, we know that this means his nursemaid who raised him. It doesn't mean his mother, because his mother passed away when he was born. She died in childbirth, so he didn't actually grow up with his mother. Anyway, she made for him this mixture of mustard seed and kneaded it on Shabbat, and he would not eat it. The wife of Ze'ira made this mixture for Rav Chia bar Ashi, velo achil, and he would not eat it. Amrale, she said to him, "L'Rabach avidile ve'achal ve'at lo achalt." Your teacher, I used to make it for him like this, and he would eat it. And you won't eat it. You're more religious than your teacher, that he would allow me to knead the mustard seed with the liquid, but you will not allow it on Shabbat and won't even eat it if I make it on Shabbat. Amar Rava bar Shabbat. Rava bar Shabbat said, "Havaka emna kamed Ravina." I was in front of Ravina, ubachashele b'shofta detoma, and what I did was I mixed it on Shabbat, but I used the stalk of a garlic. So because I used a stalk of garlic, v'achal, he was able to eat it because I did it in such an unusual manner that it was clearly not the normal way to do it. Amar Mar Zutra said, Letilchata kechol hanishmateta. None of the statements thus far recorded are accepted as the halacha. Ela kihad de itmar. Rather, the following statement is the definitive one. Chardal shelashum erev Shabbat. When you have mustard that was needed on Erev Shabbat lemachar memachol ben bayad ben bakli, you can mix it in any way, whether with your hand or with the vessel, and you can even add honey to it. Velo yitrof, but you shouldn't beat it in the way that you would beat eggs to scramble them. Ele me'arev, rather you mix it in. Shachalayim sheshachalkan me'erev Shabbat. If you had cress that you ground up on Erev Shabbat lemachar noten l'tochan shemen v'chometz, you can mix into it on Shabbat itself oil and vinegar. Or mamshich l'tochan amita, and you can add mint to it. Velo yitrof, but again, you shouldn't beat it in the way that you beat eggs. Ele ma'arev, you should just stir it nicely and gently. So it's clear that you're not kneading, and nor are you involved in any other melacha that would be prohibited on Shabbat, such as grinding or crushing. Shum shirisko erev Shabbat, garlic that you crushed on erev Shabbat, lemachar noten tochol pul ugrisin. You can put into it the next day various kinds of beans or legumes. Velo yishchok, but you shouldn't beat them in order to crush them. Ela me'arev umamshichet amital tochan. So you can mix them gently, stir them gently, but you can't beat them into it because that is again like beating or crushing spices on Shabbat, which is not permitted because of tochen. Because of grinding. My amita, what is this amita that you put in to both of these mixtures? It said that we put amita into with the garlic, and it also mentioned to put amita in with the cress. So what is amita? My amita, ninaya. It's talking about mint. Amar Abai said shma mina hay ninaya ma'aliyah l'tachalei. This shows you that mixing it with cress, mixing mint with cress is very good. It's beneficial to the mixture because you see that it's recommended or it's discussed whether you can put the mint in on Shabbat. That indicates that putting mint into cress is a positive enhancement of it. Ve'osin anumlin b'Shabbat. So anumlin was some kind of spiced wine, and the Mishnah had discussed how much you're allowed to make on Shabbat. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught osin inumlin b'Shabbat. You can make inumlin ve'en osin aluntit. But you can't make aluntit. Aluntit was some kind of a medicinal mixture. Inumlin ve'ezohi aluntit. So what is the difference between these two mixtures? Anumlin, yain udvashu pilpilin. So anumlin is just spiced wine. It contains wine, honey, and pepper. Aluntit, yain yashan. Aluntit is old wine, aged wine, umayim slulin, and clear water. Va'farsimon, and balsam. Da'avdei lebe masuta, lemekar. They would make this for people who came out of the bathhouse to help them cool off after being in the bathhouse. Amar Rav Yosef. So therefore it's considered a medicinal remedy. That's why you're not allowed to make it on Shabbat. Amar Rav Yosef said, Zimna chada alit bat Mar Ukva. Once I followed Mar Ukva lebebanei into the bathhouse. Ki nafki, when I came out, atai ashakyan chamra. He gave me. I came and he gave me chamra. Chad kasa. I had 1 cup of this special wine for coming out of the bathhouse. V'chashimi bintad diroshi va'ad tufrad dikar'i, and I felt it from the hair on my head to the nails on my feet. In other words, to my toenails. The ashakyan kasacharina hava mistafina delma minakuli mizchuta de alma daate. He said, if I had had any more than this 1 cup, I would have been afraid that they would have deducted it from my reward in the world to come. Now, what this seems to mean, according to Rashi, is that it was such a powerful drink. He felt so much pain and discomfort, and in other words, it chilled him so much that had he had another cup of it, he would have needed some of his eternal reward to pay for the miracle of being saved from the effects of this wine, because it had such a drastic impact on him. Didn't Mar Ukva drink this every day? The answer is Shane Mar Ukva de Dashpe, because he drinks it every day. He's accustomed to it. Therefore, it doesn't have such a cataclysmic effect on his body. And so, whereas Rav Yosef experienced it as very intense, Mar Ukva would not experience it at that level. The new Mishnah tells us, Ein shorin tachiltit bapusharin. We cannot soak chiltit in pusharin, in lukewarm water. Chiltit is a type of plant which has a very, very pungent fruit that comes from it, and this very, very pungent. It's also called, I believe, devil's dung. It has a certain gum that's taken from this plant that has a very pungent odor and a very strong taste, and they would use it for medicinal remedy as well. And apparently, from what I understand, even today it's used for that. You cannot soak it on Shabbat in warm water, which was a way of somehow improving it or completing it in order that it be used. But you can put it into vinegar on Shabbat. You cannot soak the vetch, which are types of feed that's given to animals. You can't soak it so that the impurities of it would float to the top. And you cannot wipe them with water. But you can place them into a sieve or into a basket, and if the impurities fall off and they fall through the cracks in the basket, that's not your problem. But you're not actually allowed to soak them or to do anything to separate the chaff from it, because that is considered to be borer, separating. En kovrin et teven bakvara velo yitnenu al gabe makom gavoa bishvil sheired amutz. You cannot place straw into a sieve, in other words, or sifter, to sift out the chaff from the straw, and you can't put it in a high place so that the wind will come and take the chaff away. However, you're allowed to carry it in a sieve. In other words, if that's the type of basket that you have to carry it, and you're not directly, intentionally removing the chaff from it, then the fact that it might naturally fall out, off of the straw through the cracks in the sieve is not your problem. That's just the vessel you're using to carry it, and you don't intend for that result. And we're following Rabbi Shimon here, who says that davar sheino mitkaven is mutar. You're allowed to do something which, when you don't intend the forbidden result, and the activity in and of itself is permitted, you're allowed to do it. Ibailahu, the Gemara asks, Sharamai, what is the violation involved? How serious is the violation if you do soak the chiltit in lukewarm water on Shabbat? Your Gemara, Adar Narsha'a kamed Rav Yosef Shara Chayav Chatat. Rav Adar Narsha'a said in front of Rav Yosef that if you soak it, Chayav Chatat. This is a biblical violation because you're perfecting, you're improving, you're completing the chiltit, and therefore it is a biblical violation of Shabbat. Amar le Abaye, Abaye said, are you telling me that if you soak a piece of meat in water, you are violating Shabbat? What does soaking in water have to do with anything? Rather, Abaye answered, this is not a biblical prohibition, but a rabbinic one. Rabbinically, one is not allowed to do something which seems like a weekday activity, and soaking this chiltit would be a weekday activity. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai, can you soak chiltit in cold water? The Mishnah seems to specifically identify lukewarm water as problematic, but not cold water. Amar le asur. He said to him, it's forbidden. So Rabbi Yanai says you're not allowed to do it. But didn't we learn in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to do it in the pushrin, in the lukewarm water, implying that cold water is okay? Which means that in cold should be permitted. If you know so much, what's the difference between me and you? In other words, why are you asking me if you already know the answer? I'll tell you the answer. The reality is that our Mishnah represents a lone opinion, the opinion of a minority. Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Rabbi Yosef Omer b'chamin asur b'tzonen mutar. That the Braita clarifies that the majority opinion is that you cannot soak the chiltit in any kind of water, whether it be hot or cold. And Rabbi Yosef comes along and says only hot is forbidden, but cold is permitted. Okay, so that means that Rabbi Yosef's opinion is being represented in our Mishnah, but the actual halacha is you can't soak the chiltit at all. Lemay avdele, what did they make this for? Li yokrad liba. They made it for the heaviness of the heart. In other words, you would soak the chiltit in water, and you would drink that mixture, and it would cure heaviness in the heart. Rav Acha bar Yosef chash biyokrad liba. Rav Acha bar Yosef had some heaviness in his heart. Atala kamei de Mar Ukva. He went to Mar Ukva. Amar le zil shatei tlata tikle chiltata betlata yome. He told him, get 3 shkalim worth, or 3 shkalim weight of chiltit, and soak it in water, and drink it for 3 days. Okay, according to so in other words, that's the amount of chiltit you should have. When it says 3 shkalim, it means mishkal gimel zehuvim. Rashi says the weight of 3 gold pieces. That's how much you should use, and make this mixture, and then drink it for 3 days. So what did he do? Azal ishtei chamsha b'Shabbat u'malei Shabbat. So he did this on Thursday and Friday, but litzafra. But in the morning, Azal shaldei midrasha. He came on Shabbat, it seems, or either he came on Friday or he came on Shabbat to find out whether he was allowed to continue drinking it on Shabbat itself. They said to him, Tanad Devei Rabbi Ada. Tanad Devei Rabbi Rav Ada. They taught in the yeshiva of Rav Ada. Vamrelan, some say Tanad Devei Mar Bar Rav Ada, and some say that it was taught in the yeshiva of Mar, the son of Rav Ada. Shote Adam kav or kabayim v'no choshesh. A person can drink a kav or a kabayim of this liquid and doesn't have to worry. In other words, even though it's used for medicinal purposes, there's no limit. Kav and kabayim is an exaggeration, perhaps. That's a tremendous amount, and even that you're allowed to drink. Amar lahu, he said to them, lishtot lo kami bayli, ki kami bayli lishrot. I understand that I'm allowed to drink it. I already started the treatment beforehand, so I should be able to continue drinking it even into Shabbat, and it shouldn't be an issue. And in fact, some people even drink this drink for normal reasons. In other words, it's like a vitamin drink. People will drink it even when they're healthy. So I knew that drinking it per se shouldn't be a problem, even though it does have medicinal effect. He said to him, what I wanted to know was, can I soak chiltit to make more of the drink on Shabbat? So my Amar lahu Rav Chia bar Avin bedidi hava uvda. Rav Chia bar Avin said, in my case, I had a situation. V'atai she'iltei l'Rav Ada bar Avan. I asked Rav Ada bar Ava, v'lo hava b'yadein. He didn't know the answer. Atai she'iltei l'Rav Huna. So I went and asked Rav Huna. V'amar hachika amar Rav. And Rav Huna told me that this is what Rav said. Shoreh betzonen o maniach b'chama. Soak it in cold water and then leave it in the sun so that it takes off the chill and warms up. Keman disharei. And that's following the opinion that permits soaking it in cold water. In other words, that seems to be against what Rabbi Yanai said before. Rabbi Yanai said that the majority opinion is that you can't soak the chiltit in cold water. Even in cold water it can't be soaked, let alone in hot water. So that seems to be that Rav Huna is following the permissive opinion of Rav Yosei. Rabbi Yosei, that's represented in our Mishnah. No, afilu laman da'asar, even the one that prohibits, that forbids, as Rabbi Yanai said, that Tanakh man the Baraita from before, that said that you're not allowed to soak it in any water, even according to him, that's only when you haven't drunk it already. But here, since you drank it for 2 days, if you don't drink it on Shabbat, you will be in danger. In other words, since he hadn't prepared it, now it's clear that this happened on Shabbat. The question was asked on Shabbat, obviously. He asked the question on Shabbat, can I soak more? I ran out of the liquid. Normally you can't soak it. You can drink it, but you can't soak it. They said, since you already started drinking it, once you've already started the treatment, you must complete the treatment, and therefore you have to continue, you have to make more of the liquid in order to continue the treatment on Shabbat. Mistamech vazil Rav Acha bar Yosef akatfed Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak bar Achte. Rav Acha bar Yosef was walking along, leaning on the shoulder of Nachman bar Yitzchak, who was his nephew. Amar Lei said, Ki matinan lebe Rav Safra Ailina. When we get to the house of Rav Safra, let's stop by. I want to talk to him. Kimatu Aile. So when they got there, he brought him in. So he helped. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak helped Rav Acha bar Yosef enter the house. Ba'amine, he asked him a question. Ma'u lekaskuse kit nita b'shabbata. He asked him, can you squeeze or can you rub linen garments on Shabbat? And the reason you would do that, l'rakuchei kitnita kamechaven v'shapir damei o dilma l'olodechi vara kamechaven v'asir. Do we look at it as an activity primarily designed, really, just to soften the garment, in which case there's nothing wrong with it? Or does it make it sparkle? It makes the garment shine, so to speak. And therefore, since it's going to make the garment shine, and it's going to make the garment whiter, therefore it comes under libun, and you're not allowed to do it. So that's the question. Amar le l'rakuchei kamechaven v'shapir damei. It's no problem, because the only reason you're doing it is in order to soften it. V'shapir damei, and it's fine. Kinafak ata almar lemai ba'amar minei. So when he came back out, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was waiting for him, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asked his uncle, "What did you ask?" Rav Safra Amar li, he said to him, "Ba'eminei, I asked him, Ma'ul kaskusei kit nita b'Shabbata. What is the law regarding squeezing or rubbing linen garments on Shabbat?" V'amar li, and he told me, "Shapir damei, it's no problem." Viti baile lemar sudra. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to his uncle, "Why didn't you ask him about a sudra?" A sudar, this was the type of a kerchief, or the type of a garment that would be worn on the head, so it was very prominent, and you especially wanted it to be white. The kitnita that he was talking about before was really an undergarment. It was like an undershirt. So there, maybe the only reason why you're squeezing it or rubbing it is to make it soft. But when it comes to the turban that you're going to wrap, with the sudar that's going to be prominently displayed on your head, that you're going to want to be nice and shiny, and maybe there he would be more stringent. So sudra lo kakimi baile, that's why I didn't ask him that, because I knew that already. In other words, so because I already asked Rav Huna and he told me that. In other words, that you wouldn't be allowed to do that. V'tifshit lemar misudra. So why didn't you conclude then, if you knew, in other words, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is still asking his uncle, if you knew that you can't, with the sudra, with the outer garment that's worn on your head, if you knew that you're not allowed to rub that fabric because it shines, why did you even bother asking about the shirt? Because I knew that it seems different. When it comes to what's on your head, there a person is concerned about how it appears. When it comes to the undershirt, I didn't know, and therefore I was happy to get the answer from Rav Safra that it's actually permitted to do it. Amar Rav Chisda says, Hi Kitnita, this undershirt made of linen. We turn to Kuf Mem Amud Bet. Mishalefo ledida mikanya shire. But kanya mimena asur. They used to hang it after it was cleaned. They would hang it on a rod. You can remove it from the rod, but you can't remove the rod from it because the rod is not a kli. It's not considered a useful vessel on Shabbat, and therefore it's muktzeh. But the shirt itself is not muktzeh, so you can remove it from the rod. Amar Rava says, "Im kile kivaehu mutar." However, if it is the weaver's rod, as we've seen, had multiple purposes and multiple uses, that you're allowed to move. Amar Rava says, "Hai kishta diyarka ichazia lemachal behema sharei letaltulei vila asir." Rav Chisda said that the vegetables, in other words, herbs, a bundle of herbs, if it's something that can be eaten by an animal, then it's not muktzeh. But if it's not capable of being eaten by an animal, then it's not muktzeh, probably because that's something that you would not really eat without it being cooked in something, or maybe you wouldn't eat it at all. So therefore it would be muktzeh if it's not at least edible to an animal. Now there's another version of this that the Rambam brings, that it's talking about leaves, not about herbs, in which case it's clear why, if it's edible to an animal, it would be not muktzeh, but if it is not edible to an animal, people don't eat leaves, and it certainly would be muktzeh in that case. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, that Hai Tal Yad Bisra, a meat that's hanging on a hook, raw meat, sharei letaltulei. You can move that meat. You can move raw meat on Shabbat, but the kavrei, but raw fish, asir, you're not allowed to move it. And some say this is talking not specifically about the meat and the fish itself, but about the hooks that meat hangs from, that pieces of meat hang from, are not muktzeh because the raw meat is not muktzeh. But hooks that fish hang from are muktzeh because they become disgusting as a result of the fish that is hung on them. But the simple reading here is the way Rashi has it is that raw meat is not muktzeh, but raw fish is muktzeh, because a person might eat raw meat under certain circumstances, but not raw fish is the assumption. Today, with all the sushi that we have, maybe we can question that assumption, but that is certainly the assumption of the Gemara. Amar Rav Katina. Rav Katina said, "Haomid ba'emtza hamita." Somebody who stands in the middle of a marital bed, kilo omid b'kreisa shalisha. It's like you're standing on the stomach of a woman. In other words, when you stand on a marital bed of a couple, you're going to think about the married woman in an illicit way, and therefore it's inappropriate. V'lav miltahi, but it's not really true. It's not really a concern, says the Gemara, so we are not stringent about that issue. If somebody lets you stand on their bed, so be it. V'amar Rav Chisda bar beirav de zabin yarka. Rav Chisda gave some advice about buying and selling. He said, if there's a yeshiva student who purchases yarka, he purchases vegetables. Lizbin aricha, kisha ki kisha, vorcha memela. He said, because the length is the only thing that differs. In other words, they would sell these bundles of vegetables not by the pound or by weight, but they would sell them by the bunch. So the bunches all had the same thickness to them, so it didn't matter how thick it was, but length came for free. In other words, if the one that you got was longer or shorter, that was the only thing you could get the most for your money, by getting longer ones. Rav Chisda bar beirav. Rav Chisda said that a bar beirav, a student of the yeshiva, is a bin kanya. That if a bar beirav, if a student of the yeshiva purchases a bundle of reeds, so what should he do? He should get lizbin aricha. He should get the long ones. Why? Because tuna ki tuna. Because the fact is that the weight of it or the thickness of it is the same. But what he benefits from is the length. That's what varies, and therefore he'll pay the same amount, he'll pay the same price, but he'll get more for his money. And Rav Chisda similarly said, Bar Beirav, a student of the yeshiva that doesn't have a lot of bread because he doesn't have a lot of money, he shouldn't eat vegetables, mishum de garir, because it makes you hungry for bread and he doesn't have any. Rav Chisda said, I never ate vegetables, not when I was poor and not when I was rich. Why? mishum degarir, because when I was poor, if I ate vegetables, I'd be hungry and I'd want bread and I didn't have any. Ba'atiruti, and when I was rich, the amina, because I said, where I can put vegetables, I'll put meat, vikavre, and fish. So since I had meat and fish available when I was wealthy, I didn't bother with vegetables, and when I was poor, I didn't want to eat vegetables because they would have whetted my appetite for things I didn't have. And Rav Chisda said, Bar Berav, a student of the yeshiva de la nafisha le rifta, if he doesn't have a lot of bread, la livtza bitzu'eh, he shouldn't cut it into small pieces because that will just be like torture for him. He won't be satisfied. Rather, he should save up his bread until he has a respectable amount to have a complete meal. And similarly, Rav Chisda said, a yeshiva student who doesn't have a lot of bread shouldn't make them hamotzi for everybody. Maitama, what's the reason? Because he's not going to do it with an ayin yafa. He's not going to do it with a nice eye. In other words, he's not going to be generous with what he gives out to all the guests because he doesn't have enough to go around. Rav Chisda says, Ana meikara lo havai batzana ad shadai yadai bechulei mana ve'eshkeche be'kol tzorki. He said, I would never make the hamotzi until, literally what it means is, I put my hand, or I in the entire basket. In other words, I put my hand in the basket to make sure that there was enough for my entire meal. That was it. So he was saying that when I was poor, when I didn't have money. So just like he gave the advice to the yeshiva students that when they're poor, there are two things they shouldn't do. They shouldn't save up individual pieces. They shouldn't eat their bread bit by bit by breaking it into small installments, but they should wait till they have a lot and then have a meal. He said that's what I would do. I would wait until I had a basket full, and only then would I eat it. And the other piece of advice was not to make the hamotzi on behalf of others if you can't give it out generously. V'amar Rav Chisda said, "Hayman de'efshar leila mechal nahama disarei v'achal dechite ka'avar mishum bal tashchit." This is an interesting statement. Rav Chisda says, if you can eat barley bread, which is cheaper, and you eat wheat bread, you're violating bal tashchit. You're violating the prohibition to waste. Why? Because you're wasting your money. When you could get cheaper bread, barley bread, you're instead buying wheat bread. Why would you do that? V'amar Rav Papa, and Rav Papa says, "Hayman de'efshar lemishtei shichra v'shatei chamra over mishum lo tashchit." Same point. Since beer is cheaper than wine, somebody who could drink beer and instead they drink wine is wasting their money. It's bal tashchit. Velav miltahi. But the Gemara says neither of these teachings are true. Bal tashchit gufa adif, because we're more concerned about ruining your body than ruining your money. And since wheat bread is healthier than barley bread and wine is better for you than beer, therefore we say that it's worth the investment and it's not considered a waste to spend money on the healthier food. V'amar Rav Chisda, or the more nutritious food. V'amar Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda said, Bar Beirav, the leitle mishcha. If a student of the yeshiva doesn't have oil, nimshe b'mayad haritze, he doesn't have oil. They used to put oil on their hands after they would eat the meal, when they were cleaning up after the meal to clean their hands. And he doesn't have any oil to put on his hands. They would first put oil on their hands and then they would put the mayim achronim. And the final water. So he says you should get some water from these little pits outside where you would see green growing on them, green moss or whatever growing on them. Now, and it's sort of oily like oil, so it has an oily kind of a consistency to it. So you should use that instead, the oily water that's in the standing pits. Now, nowadays, I'd say we'd probably consider that pretty unsanitary, but that was what they did. Rav Chisda said, Bar Rav, there's bin umtza, there's bin unka. That a student of the yeshiva who has the opportunity to buy meat should buy meat from the neck, because it has three types of meat. It has meat, as Rashi says on the side here, you get three different tastes. There's fatty meat, there's lean meat, and there's also the gid hatzavar. There is also the sinewy part of the meat as well. So you get three different tastes in one. Avam Rav Chisda says, Bar Beirav, a yeshiva student, dizabin kitonita, lizbin mid nahar abba, v'nichavara kalt latin yomin. He says he should buy it from, if he's going to buy a linen tunic, he should buy it from Nehar Abba, where they had very fine linen tunics, and he should whiten it, he should clean it every 30 days. Because then it will last him a whole year, and he won't have to buy another one. Va'anna arava, and I promise you, in other words, I guarantee that it will last you that long. My kitonita, what is this kitonita? What does it mean? What kind of language is this? Kitana, it means a nice garment. It means a fine piece of actually, that's what it means. Kitonita means a nice garment, but he's saying, what is the derivation of the term kitonita here that we use in this context? What is it? Why do they have this funny word for this tunic that's made out of linen? So Rashi explains, katna'a, ru'uya lohoshiv ba'alea bekatna'a, that it means somebody who's worthy of good companionship. In other words, if you dress in a classy way, if you dress with a nice shirt like this, then you're worthy of hanging out with important people and being important. Rav Chizda said that a yeshiva student should not sit on a new reed mat because they are damp when they're first made, and this will ruin his clothing. Rav Chizda says, Bar Beirav, lo lishadar banei la'ushpizei lechavrei telav orach ara dilma chazibe midi ve'ate lemiganya. He says that one who is staying, and in those days, oftentimes the yeshiva students would stay with a host, or they would have some kind of lodging. You shouldn't give your clothing to the host to wash it for you, because he might find something dirtiness of a kind on your garment, either some kind of emission from your body or something else that will cause you to be disgraceful in their eyes, and you don't want that to happen. Amar lahu Rav Chizda lebenatei. Rav Chizda said to his daughters, Teheve tzniatan ba'apei gavraichu. You should be very modest in front of your husbands. In order to endear yourself to your husband, you should be modest in front of him. Lo techlu nahama ba'apei gavraichu. Don't eat bread in front of your husband because he might see you as a glutton and look down on you. Lo techlun yarka balelia. Don't eat vegetables at night because it gives you bad breath. Lo techlun tamare balelia. And don't eat dates at night because they give you gas and they make you have to go to the bathroom. So you don't want to have an uncomfortable situation at night. Lo tishnun shichra balelia. And similarly, don't drink beer at night because it will cause you, If you drink beer at night, again, it will cause you to have gas and stomach problems at night, just like the dates. Same problem. Velo tifnun hechad mifane gavraichu, and don't go to the bathroom in the same place that your husband goes to the bathroom, because if he sees you, it might cause him to look down at you and see you in a negative light. V'chika kare abava inish. When somebody knocks at your door, lo timrun mano elamani. Don't say who is it in a male with the male term of who is it. What man is it? But mani, what woman is it? In other words, who is it for a woman? As if it's so that you don't seem like someone who is accustomed to having the company of other men, and therefore you're asking who is it in the male form. Ask who is it in the female form. And then now we're going to take the interpretation, because Rashi's interpretation here is very difficult to understand. I'll go over it in a second, but first we're going to take the opinion of the Ran, which is also what the Steinsaltz brings, I believe, as a translation here. I looked at it quickly to see, I was looking for alternative translations because Rashi's was so unusual. So this is how the Ran interprets it. He says like this: Nakit margenita bechada yadei v'chora bechada yadei. That Rav Chizda took a pearl in one hand, and he took some kind of a dirty thing, like a piece of coal or some kind of piece of dirt or whatever it was, in a burnt substance in another hand. So what did he do? Margenita achavele lo. He showed them the pearl. V'chora lo achvelo. And he didn't show them the dirt or the coal or whatever it was that was the dirtier, the less valuable of the thing. Ad mitzaran, until they got upset and they really wanted to know what was in his other hand. V'adar achvelo, and then he showed it to them. So this is understood as a mashal, as a metaphor, meaning that if you are modest and you cover up, then something that's a pearl but is exposed is treated with less value and less significance than something that might have less value but is hidden and covered. And as the Meiri says, that even the most unattractive person, if they cover up, if they're modest, if they leave a lot to the imagination, can inspire the attraction and the interest of others, as opposed to someone who might be beautiful but lays everything out there. They diminish their own beauty in the eye of the beholder. Now there's another interpretation here in Rashi that means that he was giving them instructions on marital relations and saying that you should engage basically in certain kinds of foreplay and excitement, you should allow your husband to touch you in many different ways in order to build up the excitement and the romance, and only then move on to having marital relations. And this is a way to keep the romance in the marriage alive. This is how Rashi interprets the Gemara here that it's not talking about what Rav Ashi what Rav Chisda was holding in his hand, but he was talking about how the man would hold you in his hand and then only allow him to engage in relations after you've built up to that point by through foreplay activities. Ein sholin et hakashinin. You can't soak vetch so that the refuse floats to the top. Matnitin de la ki haytana. Our Mishnah does not follow the following Tana. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "En mashkichin bekvara kol ikar." That even to carry things around, because we said that although you're not allowed to sift and you're not allowed to soak things in order to separate refuse from the desirable parts, you are permitted to carry things in a sieve, even though walking along the parts that you don't want, the impurities might fall through the openings of the sieve, and effectively you have purified the substance. So that was what our Mishnah said, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "Ein mashkichin bekvara kol ikar." We do not make use of a kvara, of a sieve, for any purpose on Shabbat, no matter what, even if the effects are seemingly unintentional, since this is a vessel that's designated for doing the malacha of borer, and the effect is going to be one of borer, of separating. Therefore, we do not permit it to be used at all, even for transporting the substances on Shabbat.